Whenever we start talking about the absolute greatest figures in magical history, there's always a few names that totally dominate the conversation. You've got the dark legends of Voldemort, the ancient myths of Merlin, but two names are pretty much always locked right there at the very top: Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald. Today, we're not just doing a simple recap of who won a fight. We're actually diving into a much more complex question. Between these two absolute titans of magic, who truly wielded the greatest power? Because this isn't just about comparing reputations, right? We are looking at two literal, once-in-a-generation minds. Their lives, their massive ambitions, and their spellcraft crossed paths in ways that literally altered their world forever.
Now, right off the bat, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking. You'd point straight to Dumbledore. And hey, there's a very obvious historical reason for that. The history books accept it as absolute fact that Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald in their legendary duel back in 1945. So if Wizard A beats Wizard B in a direct head-to-head clash, it seems like basic logic to say Wizard A is the more powerful one. Case closed, right? Well, actually, no, not exactly. As we almost always find when we really dig into history, it's never quite that simple. Just winning a single fight doesn't automatically guarantee absolute magical supremacy. Think about it. Weaker opponents can totally beat stronger ones just through a lucky environment, circumstance, or, frankly, just a pure fluke. To really figure this out, we need to zoom all the way out and look at their entire scope of magical abilities, right from the very beginning.
So let's start with their raw potential. Both of these guys were completely exceptional from their youth. Neither of them was some late bloomer who just kind of figured it out over a few decades. Dumbledore's brilliance at Hogwarts is incredibly well documented. I mean, the sheer awe he inspired in highly seasoned professionals when he was just a teenager is actually staggering. Griselda Marchbanks, who examined him during his NEWTs, famously went on record saying he did things with a wand she had literally never seen before. And that is a huge statement, considering she probably evaluated thousands of students over her life. Dumbledore wasn't just good at one specific branch of magic. His mastery was totally complete. He was dazzling his examiners with wand work nobody had ever thought of, transfiguring objects in impossible ways, and just sweeping up every single academic honor you could possibly get. Now, Grindelwald was a prodigy too, absolutely. But his path over at the Durmstrang Institute was radically different. He was definitely not your model student. He actually got expelled. But, and this is key, he wasn't expelled for slacking off or lacking skill. He got kicked out because he was already dangerously testing the absolute limits of forbidden magic. Standard magical education just wasn't enough for him. He wanted to push way further, way faster, directly into those dark areas that everyone else considered totally off limits. And getting expelled didn't slow him down for a second. Honestly, it probably just fueled his overarching drive for power. From day one, he was an ideological revolutionary, diving into depths of magic that would make a fully grown, seasoned wizard run for the hills. And it was exactly that relentless drive that eventually brought Grindelwald to Godric's Hollow in England, chasing the legend of the Deathly Hallows. This right here is the absolute turning point of our story, because this is where Dumbledore and Grindelwald finally cross paths. I want you to really think about the intense loneliness of being a genius. When you are just that far ahead of literally everyone else around you, the world's got to be an incredibly quiet, isolating place. So when these two immensely talented young men found each other, it wasn't just, the start of a nice friendship. It was this explosive collision of two isolated, absolutely brilliant minds. They had this shared massive ambition to unite the Hollows and totally end the International Statute of Secrecy. Finding someone who could finally operate on their elite level, it accelerated their magical growth exponentially. They pushed each other to heights that neither of them could have ever reached on their own. But if we want to find the truth about who was greater, we have to actually define what power means in the first place. For Dumbledore, his mastery was complete and incredibly psychological. He was the master strategist, a brilliant innovator. He understood the complex nature of people just as deeply as he understood a complicated spell. He knew exactly how and when to apply his vast knowledge with total precision. Grindelwald, though, his power was way more expansive and boundary-pushing. He wasn't just a threat because he could cast heavy-hitting curses. He was terrifying because he had this overwhelming, charismatic ability to persuade people, to inspire them, and to actually build an entire international movement around his ideology. Honestly, convincing thousands of people to blindly follow your vision is, in a lot of ways, a much more staggering display of power than just winning a standard duel. Okay, so now we absolutely have to address the elephant in the room. Grindelwald eventually gets his hands on the fabled Elder Wand. We're talking about the most famous wand in all of magical history, literally known for making its owner unbeatable. And this introduces a really difficult question for us. As Grindelwald was out there building his terrifying global regime, how much of that catastrophic threat was his own raw innate power, and how much of it was just the wand acting as a massive amplifier? If he's out there pulling off extraordinary magic, but he's using a mythical artifact specifically designed to boost magical power, it undeniably complicates our comparison. We basically have to figure out where the wizard ends and the wand begins.
But we do have to be a little careful with legends. Dumbledore himself actually analyzed the tale of the three brothers and pointed out a super important detail. The Elder Wand has been beaten hundreds of times over its incredibly bloody history, which heavily suggests this thing isn't just an automatic cheat code for power, right? It's not a guaranteed victory button. Really, it primarily enhances whatever greatness is already there. If you handed that powerful wand to just an average run-of-the-mill magic user, they aren't suddenly becoming a global threat. It requires a formidable engine to actually drive it. So Grindelwald's immense natural talent and his sheer force of will, those were absolutely the driving force behind his reign, for sure. But there is actually another completely fascinating layer to this whole Elder Wand debate. Did Grindelwald ever even truly master the thing? Think about how he got it. He didn't win it in some epic, honorable duel. No, he literally broke into the wandmaker Michael Grigorovich's house, stunned the guy from a window ledge, and literally just jumped out laughing. Yes, he physically took possession of the wand, but he basically stole it in a hit and run. This raises a massive possibility. By just taking it in a quick ambush, maybe he never actually won its full, true allegiance. If the wand never yielded its absolute maximum potential to him, then that means Grindelwald was operating at a terrifying international threat level without even having the full backing of the Deathly Hallow he was holding, which is just wild to think about. We also have to look at the deeply personal, messy history between these two. They weren't strangers meeting on a battlefield. They shared ideals, massive regrets, and undeniable affection from when they were younger. We know Dumbledore actively avoided confronting Grindelwald for years, and it wasn't for tactical reasons. It was because the idea of facing him was emotionally agonizing. And in this universe, love and regret aren't just psychological concepts. They are established, tangible magical forces. They actively interfere with and shape spell work. If that heavy emotional weight existed for Dumbledore, we have to assume Grindelwald felt it too. If the Elder Wand responds to the sheer will and lethal intent of its master, we really have to wonder if a lack of true murderous intent from either guy basically blunted the wand's edge when they finally did clash. Let's move on to Section 1, Secrets of the Duel, breaking down that famous 1945 confrontation. So all of these incredibly complex emotional variables, the murky rules around magical artifacts, and decades of unrivaled magical growth, it all finally converges in 1945. But here's the crazy part. This duel is shrouded in absolute mystery. We genuinely do not have a play-by-play. We don't know what specific spells were used, how they used the environment, or the exact sequence of events. We literally only know the final outcome. The details are so scarce that actual conspiracy theories exist within the magical record. Take Rita Skeeter, the notoriously cynical historian. She actually suggested that anyone expecting a spectacular legendary battle would be disappointed, claiming Grindelwald simply conjured a white handkerchief from his wand and quietly surrendered. Now, obviously, we take her claims with a massive grain of salt, but the very fact that a theory like that could even be published just goes to show how incredibly little the public knows about what really happened that day. When Dumbledore reflected on the duel later on, he very humbly claimed he was just a shade more skillful. Now, knowing Dumbledore and his total penchant for understatement, he was probably downplaying the whole event. But even still, he's acknowledging that the gap between their abilities was remarkably thin. But here is the truly telling part. Grindelwald survived. He was defeated, sure, and locked up in Nurmungard, but he wasn't destroyed. He wasn't even physically crippled. Think about it. In a duel between the two absolute most powerful magic users on the planet, throwing world-ending magic at each other, the loser walks away physically completely intact? That strongly suggests that lethal intent was just completely absent from that battlefield. It wasn't a brutal fight to the death. It was just this deeply tragic, remarkably restrained end to a very personal falling out. Okay, so if we take that murky, emotionally compromised duel out of the equation for a second, how do we accurately judge them? Well, we have to look at their sheer battlefield presence, based strictly on what we've actually seen them do out in the open. And when we look at Grindelwald's magical ceiling, it is genuinely terrifying. He wielded destructive potential on a scale that very few people in history could even comprehend, let alone actually control. Take his Protego Diabolica spell as the prime example. Honestly, it's arguably the most impressive feat of magic ever demonstrated. Just picture this. A roaring ring of blue, cursed fire rapidly expanding out across an underground amphitheater in Paris.
And it wasn't just some static shield or a wildly thrown curse. It was highly intelligent. It was actively identifying his enemies, literally incinerating anyone who stepped through to oppose him, while completely safely allowing his loyal followers to pass right through it. The sheer scale of it was monstrous. It threatened to consume the entire city of Paris if it was left unchecked. It acted way more like a living, breathing weapon than standard combat magic. It was offensive, defensive, large-scale, and highly selective, all at once. In terms of just pure, unleashed, destructive boundary pushing, Grindelwald's capabilities were staggeringly high.
So, that brings us to the verdict. How do we actually measure the greatest power here? Well, if you are someone who really values the ultimate head-to-head outcome, the established history books, and the sheer, complete tactical genius it takes to overcome a rival carrying the legendary Elder Wand, then Dumbledore is your undeniable victor. But if you prioritize revolutionary force, that charismatic ability to build global movements, and a proven willingness to push the absolute limits of destructive, massive-scale magic, then Grindelwald's case remains incredibly, almost overwhelmingly strong.
With the lines completely blurred between their raw innate potential, the unpredictable amplification of these legendary magical artifacts, and the really heavy restraint of their deeply emotional history, we are left looking at a rivalry that is just unlike any other. They literally made each other great, and then they had to tear each other down. Taking all of this evidence into account, the brilliant, deeply psychological strategist versus the terrifying, boundary-pushing revolutionary, who do you believe truly wielded the greatest power? It's a huge question, and I'll leave you to think about it.